done, because now we're already getting people here on our social media accounts letting us know that it was felt very strong. Things have fallen off. And I know that oftentimes people, I'll tell you this, the last several years that I've been in an earthquake, nothing has fallen off my shelves. To hear the person that we were just speaking to, Frank, earlier, saying that things have fallen and broken, I mean, that's a pretty substantial earthquake for us here in Southern California over the last several years. And what a difference between, so we felt just this rattling motion here in Glendale, but for Frank, he had that feeling of a boom or something that really shook out of nowhere. Like he described it as a jolt. Yeah, maybe something hit his building like a truck. You hear people explain that feeling of, did a plane crash? Did a car run into my building initially? So people feel it differently compared on the location. And he is in the general Malibu area. He said he was about a mile from the epicenter, so yeah, he would feel it a lot more significantly than we would certainly. We do have some video from our newsroom when this all happened. It does show you some of the stuff shaking around there. You can see this is in the studio. And you can see the lights above shaking and also the camera shaking, obviously, as well. Yeah, the studio, we have so many lights hanging there. You can see, you really get a sense of how violent the shaking is. Just getting some reports that as far as Riverside, Paris, Montclair, Riverside, there's another one, Fontana, so out towards the Inland Empire, it was felt. That's a long way away from Malibu. Yeah, I think for so many people, it depends on what you're doing at the time. Are you driving? Are you stationary? You know, Frank, we can make perhaps light of this, hopefully, a little bit. He was in the shower. He said the water was still running, so he had to jump out of the shower. So I think it depends on what you're doing in that moment. And Frank is now joining us again on the phone. Frank, good morning again to you. We're now live with all of our viewers on ABC7. We described what you felt. Explain again that moment now, what, about 10 minutes ago? What was it like for you?
I just got into the shower and the water was hitting me, so I was kind of distracted, and it felt just like a large, like something ran into our building or something. I live right on PCH. That wouldn't be unusual for something like that to happen, but that's what I thought, my first reaction. And then I felt a little bit of shaking, and then I knew it was an earthquake, so I ran out of the shower, left the water on, and just was headed for cover. And it stopped really quick. It wasn't very long in duration. I don't have anything broken. I did have a couple things fall over, but nothing that broke glass or anything like that.
And Frank, you said you ran for cover. What did you do? Did you get under a desk or something?
No, I literally was just running out of the shower. Like, I don't want to be in a bathroom where there's a lot of like mirrors and glass. That just makes sense to me, to get somewhere away from glass. Also, my phones were screaming that earthquake warning when I ran out. So that was kind of alarming too. Like, wow,
That's very interesting. Yeah, there was a mix of that here in Glendale. Some of our coworkers got the alert. John actually did, but apparently missed it.
I didn't have my phone with me. Yeah.
Okay, so some people received those alerts, others did not. Frank, stay with us here. Just recapping some of our very small aftershocks over the past few minutes: 2.7, 2.3, 1.8. Those are to be expected in a situation like this. And Frank, you're talking about, what falls down, what gets knocked over. We always see, I think, typically situations where bottles at liquor stores and groceries maybe falling off the shelves. Frank, thank you so much. We appreciate the information. Joining us live, or at least what we're going to live right now, is Dr. Lucy Jones, a leading seismologist here in Southern California over at Caltech. She is speaking live. Let's listen in.
I also see Sue Hopp has joined. You might want to come in as a panelist. You are going to be able to speak from where you are. So we do have one question in from Ron Lynn. Are we having more quakes recently? Yes. Whether it's statistically significant is difficult to tell. I actually just went through a process of bringing up the last, 65 years of magnitude 4s. If we look back over that time period and count the number of sequences with at least one magnitude 4, that's very different than saying how many magnitude 4s do we have, because the biggest year for magnitude 4s was 1992, because we had aftershocks to the Landers earthquake. But if we look at independent sequences with at least 1 4, over the last 65 years, it averages 8 to 10. Some years we have one that just had one year that had 1, several with just 2. the highest amount was 13 in 1988. This is now the 14th magnitude 4 plus sequence that we've had in Southern California in the so far this year. So yes, this is a more active year than we had in the past. But it's not yet at the point of problem with small number statistics. We can't quite say yet that whether or not it is actually statistically significant to be seeing this. Okay, there's enough new people in. I would also remind, again, scientists, if you want to be speaking, you need to come in as a panelist and not as an attendee, so please switch that around. Sue Huff from the U.S. Geological Survey has joined us, so she's going to be available as well. I'll give an overview of it for people who just joined in. We have a magnitude 4.7 that happened at 7:28 this morning. It's located about 5 miles north of Malibu. The fault associator doesn't have a clear picture. This is not uncommon for an earthquake this small. And to be this size earthquake is a fault area of a matter of 100 meters, maybe a few hundred meters. And that's going to be a small enough thing. It's located at 7 miles below the surface of the earth. It doesn't need to be associated with the fault that actually comes through and is mapped at the surface. So the smallest earthquakes, it's not that obvious. There are some faults nearby. The movement on the earthquake was horizontally. Here in Southern California, we can either get horizontal motion or upward motion on a dipping fault. This is the sideways motion, what we call strike slip motion in this earthquake. So that's an overview. Sue, if you have anything to add about what's here now, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, we don't obviously.
Sue, you're muted. You muted yourself.
I think I would know by now. Yeah, it's obviously early. We don't have a lot of information. It's curious. The best indication of shaking severity usually comes from citizen provided did you feel it accounts. There are notably few contributed to the system for an earthquake that clearly would have been felt by a lot of people. It suggests to me there may be some temporary issue with the system, but shaking was felt out to a distance of about 100 kilometers or 60 miles. Not strongly. It was relatively weak shaking that's been reported in the near field region. It should have been strong enough to maybe knock things off of shelves. We don't expect damaging shaking in the modern built environment for an earthquake like this. But clearly there's a lot more data to be collected.
Let's see, we have another question that's come in. Okay, yes, Ron points out there was another Malibu quake, also 4.6 back on February 9th. I've just been looking at those locations. They're not actually the same location. The February 9th earthquake was slightly south of Malibu offshore. This is a bit north of the coastline, and therefore a little bit north of the Malibu Fault, which pretty much runs along the coast at that point. It is, however, right, we are having earthquakes. None of them have been damaging, they've all been small. We need to remember that when you have earthquakes, you tend to have earthquakes. And because the relative number of large to small are the same, having something larger, we did have the magnitude 5.2 up near just south of Bakersfield, of course, a little over a month ago. This is a really good reminder that the quiet of the last couple of decades is not our long-term picture, and we do need to be prepared. I would, just to preempt these questions, no, it's not related to the weather. It's, when it's 7 miles below the surface of the earth, the surface weather really does not make a difference. But And also, besides, we finally break the weather and then we get it, then you're really stretching it if you're trying to make those correlations. So let's just remember to keep that out of the discussion, please.
Can I jump in? There's two questions about the increase of seismicity. Is activity up, which it sort of seems like it is, but then what does that mean? Is that ominous seismicity fluctuates, and seismologists have been trying to read the tea leaves for decades, looking for patterns that precede large earthquakes, and that's never really panned out. If there is an increase, we can't, really interpret that, except for what Lucy said, that when you have a lot of earthquakes, you have a lot of earthquakes, as Charles Richter said, that earthquakes increase statistically the odds of more events. So yeah, any felt event like this, they're great reminders to take all the steps that people probably know that are helpful.
Thank you. So, and we have a hand up from Bob DeCastro.
Recording in progress.
Okay, Bob, if you could please use the Q&A function to ask your question, we will answer it there. And Lucy and Sue, we have another question. This is from El Ortega. We've gone over this. Which fault did this strike on? It sounds like it was not associated with one that we're aware of yet.
Well, no, let's not put it that way. There are a couple of mapped faults in the region. We have about equal probability of it being on one of them and probability that it's not on any mapped fault. And I think we need to remember that an earthquake this small, the area that gets involved, that moves in an earthquake, is what controls the magnitude. And and so a 4.7, it's a matter of a few hundred meters at most. And then at 7 miles below the surface of the earth, it could be on lots of things. It could be on something that doesn't reach through to the surface. That's often the case with our smaller ones. But it is near, it is near some known faults. The other thing is that you can't say it's what earthquakes it triggers are not confined to the fault that it's actually located on. So we have some slight probability. It's about 5% of earthquakes in Southern California are followed by something bigger, and the fact that it's not on a major fault or that it's not clearly associated with it doesn't affect that number at all. We do have a question, and Sue, this is probably a good one for you. Based on the magnitude and depth, how far will this likely be felt and what damage might be incurred?
Yeah, I already addressed that a little bit. And as far as the fault goes, it's known that there are secondary faults that are in proximity to the faults we know about. So an earthquake as small as Lucy said, it can be difficult to figure out. The shaking that's been reported has been felt out to a distance of about 60 miles or 100 kilometers. Most of that information comes from the Did You Feel It system, which that I've seen has remarkably few responses.
It's I just updated it, Sue. There's over 5,000.
Okay, they're great. There may have been some backlog because they were getting too much information. So, relatively weak shaking would have been felt over most of the greater Los Angeles region, which has an awful lot of people. The strongest reported shaking at this point is what we call intensity 5. That's strong enough to knock things off of shelves in the immediate area. It's not generally strong enough to cause any structural damage in a modern built environment.
I would say, I didn't feel it because I was in the middle of my exercise routine. People felt it though farther away. Keep on going east, you get out to San Bernardino and Riverside, and you're having some people feel it there. It is striking that some of the strongest shaking, not surprisingly, but it's right down the west side of Los Angeles, right? Because you're going to get a bit of amplification if you've got deep sediments, which you do along the west side, and it's still pretty close to Malibu. So it seems to have been pretty widely felt, even up to definitely intensity 3 and some of intensity 4, even as far south as Irvine. So
to jump back in, I think the system may have been bogged down because so many responses were coming in so quickly. Yeah, there is felt shaking out to about 200 kilometers and a little bit beyond. Weak shaking as Lucy suggested, you'll feel it if you're sitting quietly. If you're moving around, you may not notice it. That's common. There are accounts of shaking at intensity 6 and above, which starts to, maybe crack plaster. But this is all preliminary information, and there's going to be a lot more data that's coming in that people will be looking at.
Ron asks, can you elaborate more on how we've been feeling more quakes? We have had more magnitude 4s in the Southern California area this year, more than average. Right? The average being about 8 magnitude 4 sequences. That's a sequences of at least 1 magnitude 4. Right? If you have a magnitude 6, you trigger lots of magnitude 4s. So we're not looking at that. So the separate sequences, long-term average of about 8. So far we've had 14 in Southern California. The largest previous year was 13. Notice these numbers are small, however. So yes, we are feeling it, but it's not yet statistically significant. Okay? And that's a big issue. Seismologists look for patterns. Everybody looks for patterns. That's why we have myths of earthquake weather and animals, and all of these things are us trying to form a pattern in what is inherently a random distribution, because we feel better when we know what the pattern is. But when we test the pattern, we can't make it for certain. So yes, we have already had more separate sequences of magnitude 4s this year in Southern California than we have seen it in the past by one sequence now. But because it's small number statistics, that doesn't mean we had a fundamental rating change. It might. We have seen some more and less active time periods in different regions, but we can't say that it means that for certain yet. And
just to jump in, people have looked back at past patterns before large earthquakes, and they've concluded that earthquake activity goes up in a region before a large earthquake. Some people have concluded that earthquake activity goes down before a large earthquake. You're sort of looking for patterns in the clouds when you know when an earthquake is, and you look back, you often find some sort of pattern. And so the question is, do patterns have any predictive meaning? And as Lucy said, that when you do the tests rigorously, they just don't.
We have a couple of more questions, had some association of it before, but the possibility that this is a foreshock, it's the same as any other earthquake in Southern California, which is about 5% of the time, one of the aftershocks gets bigger than the first one, and we change the name and call the first one a foreshock. So 95% chance that we won't.
Sorry to keep interrupting you, but there will be a USGS forecast for this event, an aftershock forecast. I'm not sure if it's up yet, but will be numbers giving the aftershock probabilities and the probabilities of a larger event.
Right. Important, thank you. Yes, the USGS creates event pages for every event, and essentially everything you've been asking us, you can find on the event page. But it does include when the numbers get run, an aftershock update. And then you keep track of what the aftershocks have been doing, and again, the possibility that it's a foreshock.
I'm not seeing it yet. It may take about half an hour and to look at how many aftershocks are occurring, and that lets us refine the forecast.
Okay.
Okay, you're listening to Dr. Lucy Jones discussing an earthquake that struck here in Southern California about 30 minutes ago, centered in the Malibu area, a 4.7 earthquake, and it shook people all across Southern California. We're getting reports of people feeling it as far away as Newport Beach, inland as well, in places like La Habra. So a good jolt for a lot of folks out there. Several aftershocks as well. No reports of significant damage so far.
Yeah, certainly maybe we not expect that at a 4.7, but we're going to follow this here throughout the morning to see if those reports do come in, especially from that Malibu area for sure.
Right. Good Morning America. I'm going to send you back to them for now, but we're going to continue following this story on our streaming channel. Wherever you stream, you can stay with us and we'll continue to cover this.
This is Eyewitness News with live breaking news.
When I started seeing the clouds, I've been here 25 years, and so knew this was not a good thing to see coming out the window.
I could see the line quite